We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and you point that gun at someone, you better be ready to pull the trigger. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Terminator month. This week, we are talking the 2009 film Terminator Salvation. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the man that travels through time at a speed of 60 seconds per minute, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. I'm excited to continue on with our Terminator month and go back to a movie that I've, at best, not revisited in some time, and at worst, never seen in its entirety before.
So you're unsure if you've actually watched this beginning to end before preparing for this podcast?
I don't know. I'm actually very confused. I am either...
Chris, I have no idea what's going on.
Chris, I have no idea. My life
Why
is
is there a
human
microphone
wasteland.
here?
No, I know I've seen like parts of it before, because like the scene where the T-800 shows up. I was like, I know I've seen this. Like there were definitely scenes where I was like, I know I've seen scenes of this movie, but there was whole parts of it where I was like, but this doesn't seem familiar. So I don't know if I watched it and it's just kind of left my brain, which is deeply possible, or if I just really hadn't watched the whole thing before. But you have actually glowingly recommended this a couple of times, so I was excited to jump in and check this one out.
Yeah, I definitely consider myself a defender of this movie. It has a bit of a bad rap. It really came and went. I mean, it tried to do something new with the Terminator franchise. It was planned as a trilogy, and we'll get into the numbers, but financially it doesn't work out, and they change gears, and we'll talk about the direction they do go. But this is like the only movie in this century that visits post-Judgment Day, primarily post-Judgment Day. We see flashbacks and hints at it, but this is entirely in the wasteland controlled by Skynet, and I think that was such a smart decision to go, and that alone, I think, gives this movie a lot of kudos. But beyond that, the story they're telling, I've always really enjoyed it. I love the design of all the new robots we see. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of positivity coming your way. I hadn't seen this movie in a while. I saw it in theaters, and I might have watched it like one more time after that. But then it's been a long time since I've revisited it, and I was a little nervous. I was like, well, I've always recommended this movie. Maybe I should watch it again. Does it really hold up? And yeah, in my opinion, I think there's more going right than going wrong. A lot of positives to talk about. That's exactly what we're going to do. This is, after all, a hashtag positivity podcast. We're going to be looking at all the good stuff that this movie does.
Cool.
So let's jump into it, Andrew. Let's set the stage a little bit. This film is released May 21st, 2009. Made on a budget of $200 million, even more expensive than T3. At the box office, however, it only brings in $371 million. When you're looking at that budget, that is simply not going to cut it, losing plenty of money for the studio. Critically, it's not well received, firmly in the negative category. It holds just a 33% critic score. On Rotten Tomato, audience is a little bit higher, but still not glowing reviews from the majority.
Yeah, it kind of came out and kind of disappeared just as quickly. Like I was thinking about when this movie came out, because it comes out in summer of 2009. So I was still in college. I was living in Huntsville. And I was just reading that like the first trailer was attached to Watchmen. And I'm just now flashing back to this nostalgic period of my life when I was in college, just going to the movies all the time. And yeah, Chris, now I'm sad.
The first Watchmen trailer was attached to The Dark Knight.
Oh, man. Ugh,
Take you back.
so I feel so old. The first Watchmen trailer was on Dark Knight. Didn't those come out the same year?
I don't want to tell you,
So
Andrew.
the first Watchmen trailer didn't come out.
I can
until the
say
year.
personally, the first time I saw the Watchmen trailer was sitting in the theaters for The Dark Knight. So if there was a trailer before that, I
Interesting.
somehow missed it. Are you going to fact check me, Andrew?
I'm just gonna look. Oh no, Watchmen was March 09, so no,
There you go.
that's better.
There you
I
go.
was wrong on my years. Makes more sense. All right, you've been fact checked and found correct.
The first Dark Knight trailer was attached to
Stop.
I Am Legend. Because I remember
I'm-
rushing to the theater so that I could see that trailer, and it changed my life forever. It was amazing.
And then you watched I Am Legend. Hashtag PP.
The movie's okay. I'll defend that one.
Yeah.
It's got its problems, but I do not know what movie had I Am Legend trailer attached to it, so the streak is going to end here.
All right, moving on, folks. I'm just reminded of my own mortality, so I'd like to enjoy the time I have left.
The movie is written by John Brancato and Michael Ferris. Once again, they also wrote T3. We talked about them on our previous episode. They come back for T4, which I think is pretty impressive because T3 and T4, if we're going to call this T4, are very different movies. They have different tones,
They
different
are.
feels. I mean, it really doesn't feel like there's a lot of shared creativity, but that is kudos to these screenwriters. I think it's impressive that you can turn out scripts that have this dramatically different of a tone and do both versions
Well,
very well.
To be fair, John Brancato and Michael Ferris are the credited screenwriters. This is a movie that was in production around our last 07-08 writer's strike. So apparently quite a few people ultimately ended up taking passes at this, one of which was Paul Haggis, who wrote $1 Million Baby, Crash, Quantum of Solace, a whole bunch of other stuff. Casino Royale, no slouch there. Sean Ryan apparently did a rewrite literally like weeks before filming was going to start, and he was a writer from things like The Shield, Nash Bridges, Lie to Me. And then apparently the on-set writer was Jonathan Nolan.
Interesting.
Who apparently McGee, I don't know how you say his name, I assume that's correct, has said that like Nolan did what he would consider the heavy lifting for this script. But due to that writer's strike, due to the way that all works, could not ultimately receive any credit for it. So it is, cool that Brancato and Ferris did write a script for this movie. I have no idea ultimately how much their script and the final version by Haggis, Ryan, and Nolan ends up looking. I would assume quite different, but the way these things work, it's got to be just different enough to get credit. So we are probably looking at a script that doesn't really resemble what it started as, but at the same time, it means a lot of people took passes at the script, which I think is something that a lot of people did note critically about it, is that sometimes that's not always a good thing. But yeah, so like I said, 2 credited writers, but at least 3 other people who took some kind of pass ultimately at what the final version of this movie was.
That is a solid point. And even our director himself, which we'll talk about, Mr. McG, which I do think it's how you pronounce it. What a name to choose to go by. But
Yeah.
our director McG, as well as our 2 main stars, also themselves worked on the story. The character of John Connor, his role was expanded because of who got cast in that role. So good point. A lot of hands in that writing room. But yeah, McG. So the man broke into Hollywood with the wildly successful Charlie's Angels and also directed that sequel, Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. Those movies are both absolutely bonkers. I think both, at least that second one, probably a candidate for a future episode of our show. But the action is so stylized and over the top and wacky and campy. And that kind of becomes what he's known for. Although, interestingly, he does direct We Are Marshall in between the Charlie's Angels films
Which
and
is
Terminator
about
Salvation.
as opposite as it gets.
Very grounded sports drama. But then goes back to the action with Terminator Salvation. And Andrew, if there was one thing I was hesitant about back in 2009 going into this movie, was the director being McG. Because nothing against his movies, but like that silly action style, that has no place in my serious sci-fi, dark, apocalyptic movie. But I think, just like I was talking about with the writers, he adapts so well to the story they're trying to tell. I think I love the action in this movie, and it never reaches those camp levels of the Charlie's Angels movies. Like, he did what was right for Charlie's Angels, and he's doing what's right for Terminator. And I think ultimately ended up being an excellent pick for director of this movie. He would go on to direct the Babysitter movies, which are horror movies that kind of have their following. I don't know if you call them horror movies. They're like what do you call like that fun horror camp? Like freaky or what genre is that, Andrew?
It's comedy horror, Chris.
Comedy horror. Why'd I have so much hard time coming up with
I
that?
don't know. I have no idea.
I feel like I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between, like, I don't know, Tucker and Dale versus Evil and Freaky or Babysitter or Happy Death Day. But sure, comedy horror.
Black comedy. Black comedy doesn't really seem right either, just because that means it's kind of bleak, dry comedy. But yeah, I don't know. That's tough. It's a tough thing, but I think I don't know. Horror comedy horror.
Fair enough. Also a producer on the TV show Chuck, which friend of the show, my wife, absolutely loves that show. And I had never seen it before. We watched the whole series together. I think it's great. Very fun TV show. He's a producer on that, directed the pilot, so heavily involved in the creation of that show.
Hey, also a producer on a number of shows, The OC, The Mountain, Supernatural, for all the Supernatural fans out there, and basically any kind of Supernatural-related show. He's got some piece of that. Not sure how that all works, but also just got some really strange producer credits. Like, he was a producer on The Duff, that teen comedy with Mae Whitman, the designated ugly friend, I think The Duff stands for, which is like a weird thing to call Mae Whitman. But just, yeah, so like a very interesting kind of odd series of films for him, but a bunch of genres, but seems to kind of be in that Netflix bubble right now with his last couple of films, The Babysitter, Rim of the World, and then the Babysitter sequel. So he's still out there doing his thing. And yeah, I do remember him definitely being kind of chastised as the pick for this, because this was kind of, it was such a weird time, because 2008-9, there was a lot of these, you heard about a lot of attempts to bring these franchises back. Like a lot of these like 80s, 90s action films, they were all coming back, but you had things like a Terminator sequel, you had a Die Hard sequel, you had them trying to do a RoboCop sequel, which ultimately becomes a reboot a few years later. Like, it's this weird time where it feels like they're trying to bring everything back, but there was this weird fear that they were all going to be like watered down. Like, Die Hard, Live Free or Die Hard, Die Hard 4. Got a lot of criticisms when it came out because it was PG-13. People were like, the movie won't be able to go as hard as the last Die Hard movies because they're quote-unquote playing it safe. And I think Terminator Salvation ends up getting kind of slid in with that, where it's like, it's just another attempt, bring back an old franchise, we're going to water it down, we're getting the guy from Charlie's Angels to direct it, and like, I think there was definitely a lot of preconceived notions about this film in its early production stages. And I am really, again, just reminded of how strange a time it was as a film fan, because you were getting this is the birth of the MCU. Like, this movie comes out after Iron Man, which is just like a weird thing to think about, that like the MCU had technically started before this movie came out. And just weird to think that how different the film landscape was. This is before streaming. This is really before, I was still getting my Netflix DVDs at this point. Like, it was a wild time.
Stupid paper envelopes that they ship those things in.
So wasteful, Chris.
And speaking of the production of this movie, one thing I think we should note too is that the Terminator rights go through a pretty long legal battle and bounce around a bit. at the end of the day, I think this is ultimately produced by Warner Bros., or they at least help fund part of it. The $200 million budget is the production budget, but millions more dollars were sunk into this project just to acquire the rights to film it. So again, when you look at that box office, just, it's like 150% of the production budget. Once you factor in marketing and the rights to the movie itself, I mean, they lost a ton of money on this, and explains why they changed gears so quickly afterwards. But you know what? Today, none of that matters, Andrew. All we're going to talk about is what this movie does well, all the best parts, best performances, hashtag positivity podcast, this moment forward. Andrew, you ready?
Yeah.
Before his execution in 2003, prisoner Marcus Wright signs his body over to Cyberdyne Systems. Miraculously, Marcus awakens in the year 2018 and finds the Earth to be controlled by machines known as Terminators. Desperate for answers, Marcus heads to enemy headquarters and meets Kyle Reese along the way. Meanwhile, the human resistance fighters rally around John Connor, who seeks to end the war for good. Marcus and John cross paths, and to the surprise of both men, they find that Marcus Wright is a cyborg designed by Cyberdyne and possibly controlled by Skynet. John Connor reluctantly agrees to work together to infiltrate Skynet headquarters and rescue the now captive Kyle Reese before blowing up the entire building. But once inside, they find themselves face to face with a new threat, the T-800. Andrew, we touched on last week, T3, that up until that point, if you want to look at criticisms in the movie, T2 was a big budget remake of T1. T3 has some new twists in the mythology, but ultimately, it's a story about two characters from the future traveling to the past. One's there to protect, one's there to hunt. That's been the synopsis, the core plot of every Terminator movie until this one. Just based on like a story plot level, this is doing something completely different. And the hashtag positivity podcast, that is my biggest praise I can heap on this movie.
I agree. Ultimately, regardless of what you want for the franchise, you can only do the pre-Judgment Day story so many times before I think you can start getting some diminishing returns. The decision to move it to post-Judgment Day, but like right before John Connor kind of ascends to the status of leader of the Resistance, I think is a great choice narratively, just because it gives you room to breathe. Obviously, there's things like John Connor has to survive to a degree, like certain characters have to survive, but you're giving yourself a whole new genre to play in, really, because like you've got this action stuff of the originals, but with this, you can kind of start diving into the actual warfare. You can start diving into fighting actual, Skynet systems versus the kind of cat and mouse of or you kind of get away from the cat and mouse of the originals, where it's kind of the Terminator's got John and the other one is coming after us. Regardless of how, where we go, what we're doing, they're going to catch up. And ultimately it leads to a big showdown where, typically speaking, everybody dies. Or rather, all the future people die. But it's by transplanting it here, we give ourselves a whole new environment. You give yourself a whole new set of circumstances. You give yourself a whole new, like I said, sort of genre to play in, where you can kind of look at the warfare aspects versus just straight action. And so in that regard, I think it is a great stylistic choice to move it to post-Judgment Day. And just like you said, it, had it all gone right, we could have added this whole new set of films post Judgment Day, kind of setting up off of the status quo that Terminator 3 sets up.
Well, we're going to talk about what this movie does specifically with its plot and the scenes that we think work. But before we get to that, we got to talk about this cast. And of course, we're going to start with the high point. Best casting, best performance of the film, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the Call of Duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, go ahead and kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Terminator Salvation?
I feel weird saying this out loud, but I am actually going to be giving it to Sam Worthington as Marcus Wright.
Now, Andrew, why does that feel weird to say out loud?
Sam Worthington feels like an actor to me that has been kind of labeled as relatively bland.
Okay.
Hashtag
PP. Hashtag PP. You know who he reminds me of? Because I kind of agree with you. He reminds me a lot of Eric Bana. He's in these huge movies. He's the lead. He's in franchises, but he never feels like the guy, you know?
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's weird because he is the guy of the Avatar films. Like, those are his movies, really, at the end of the day. Like, which, he's, in a lot of CG for that. But like, he's kind of gotten this kind of record as, just being a very kind of bland, if straight to DVD were an actor, it was Sam Worthington.
Why are you picking up for the Mark Strong Award, though, Andrew? Obviously, you like what he's doing here.
I'm kicking against that. And I was just trying to look at stuff he's even done recently, and there's not a lot of big stuff in there. There's really not. So it feels like he's, the Avatar stuff comes through. He does those as well, but like generally speaking, it feels like there's not a lot of big stuff. I know he was in Hacksaw Ridge and a couple of other things, but here, I think he's given a very interesting spot to sit. He's truly given a role where he is in between both sides of this. He believes he's human, but he's clearly a robot. This gives the character a great sense of internal conflict, because he actually doesn't know this for most of the film. You, as the audience, kind of guess that that's what's happened.
Okay.
It's the only way he can kind of look.
Let me jump in here, Andrew. Did you know? Because you're not sure if you saw this movie beginning to end, you saw pieces of it. Before you watched this movie this week for this podcast, did you know he was the Terminator?
Yes.
Okay. They spoil that in the trailers. And I don't know if that's why you know.
They do.
But I saw this movie in theaters technically before it came out. Thanks to mutual friend Doug, who worked at a movie theater at the time. Thanks, Doug. And I knew going in that he was a Terminator. The scene of John Connor, like, unstrapping his head from the board and him looking down, seeing his robot parts and screaming, it's in the trailer. And that comes really late in the movie. And it's a huge reveal. Even if maybe you've guessed it by then, even if you feel like something is going on, there are hints. It's not out of nowhere. But it's such a big moment in the movie. And I think it actively hurts the film, having seen that going in or knowing that for sure going in.
I agree. It would... Apparently, these movies just have a habit for spoiling third act twists and trailers. As you'll find out,
we'll come back. We'll come back to that.
But that's kind of what I meant. Like, if you've somehow got into this movie bereft of any information, there's still clues. Obviously, he's not aged a day since the day he died. Like, that's your biggest clue, probably offhand, is that he looks exactly the same. And also, he's surviving a lot of stuff. So there's definitely some clues that there's something more going on with this character. Obviously, the big reveal probably comes right when he gets blown up, when a metal mine sticks to his leg. Right. But
I also, I was looking for these things this go around since I know the twist. Right. He doesn't eat the entire movie. He doesn't eat the 2-day-old coyote. He doesn't eat the fresh carrots from the group of survivors. They don't call attention to it, but when other characters start eating, he doesn't.
But in that regard, he's, like I said, he's given a far more complex role than a lot of other people in these movies tend to get. It used to be you're the killing machine, you're the hero, like you're kind of straight-laced one way or the other. With this, you're kind of given a character who does sit in between. He believes he's human, but ultimately is not aware that he is still a part of the machine network. How much free will he has, how much he just thought he was having free will. He has a whole big conflict that he gets into with Skynet towards the end, where he doesn't really know how much of it was him versus how much it was Skynet kind of guiding him and letting him think it was himself. But just an interesting spot to sit. And I think he does a really good job with it. There's, A lot of confusion that comes with something like that, and I think he does. That's it's not to say he looks confused the whole movie, but he's doing a good job at finding that right balance of knowing who he is, but still being very scared at what's going on around him. And ultimately, at the end, he gets to be a big part of our final fight. Ultimately, makes a huge sacrifice at the end. But yeah, I think, like I said, because I can't say I've sought out Sam Worthington much in my life, but I think here he's given probably the most complex role in the film, and I think he does a great job with it.
Yeah, I agree 100% as far as this character, from a writing perspective, is the most interesting character in the movie, and one of many new ideas that they bring to the franchise. We had never seen it's hard to even call him a Terminator, because he's not necessarily designed for terminating, but, he's a machine created by Skynet or Cyberdyne, and genuinely thinks he's human. Right? It's so interesting to think about. And I agree, like, Sam Worthington is really crushing it. That confusion, but it's not like he is a lost puppy the whole movie.
Right.
We know a little bit about his past. He was a bit of a bad guy, and he knows how to handle a gun that comes into play. Like, he has like some training or experience that he's not afraid to use to find his answers. And along the way, the human characters kind of help shape his morality, which I think is really interesting. Has a great redemption arc. And I really like this character. I think Sam Worthington is crushing it. Andrew, that is a great pick for Mark Strong Award. My Mark Strong Award is going to go to someone else. I think by and large, we got a pretty solid cast here. But the one that's elevating it for me, I think, is a very crucial role, is Anton Yelchin as Kyle Reese. There's a lot I got to say about this. For one, Kyle Reese, very important character in Terminator lore, but we haven't seen him since T1. So it's kind of cool to have another character step into this role, obviously a younger version of Kyle Reese that we saw. And ultimately, the reason he's getting my Mark Strong Award is because he is, without a doubt, the heart of this movie. He's dedicating his life to the Resistance without officially being in the Resistance. He cares about human life above all else, willing to help anyone. The main person that shapes Marcus's morality when they come into contact with each other, and is the heart of the movie, which is so important because this is a movie filled with gruff military men barking orders, and Marcus Wright, who's a confused man without a past, some really serious stuff. But to have him be so like optimistic and hopeful in this wasteland really makes him shine. And Anton Yelchin actually absolutely crushes it. Obviously, R.I.P. Anton Yelchin passed away in 2016 due to a freak accident involving his Jeep Grand Cherokee. If you want to read about some bad design, look up the way the gear shift worked on that Grand Cherokee that caused it to roll backwards on him. It's a horrible situation all around. Obviously lost him way too early, but left behind in a pretty incredible body of work. Love him in all the Star Trek films. Charlie Bartlett might have been like most people's first, when he jumped into most people's radar. And then in 2015 is in Green Room, which is legitimately one of my favorite movies. I consider that an absolutely perfect movie, and he is the star of that movie. So excellent in everything that he is in. R.A.P. But here is Kyle Reese. Like I said, being the heart of this movie, it just brings so much needed heart and optimism and hope and levity that I think elevates the quality of the film.
Yeah, Green Room's also great if you would really like to see Patrick Stewart play against type.
Yes, 100%.
Which I love almost exclusively for that reason. But I think this is a great pick. This is definitely in the running for it. Not to say anybody else is doing a bad job, but their roles are a lot more straightforward, I think. With Kyle Reese, you've got an interesting piece here because he doesn't even know John Connor yet. So we're definitely we're before the events of the beginning of T1 at this point where they send Kyle Reese back. I also like in this movie that they have gone for someone who I think has the same energy as Michael Biehn. Because the way Michael Biehn is in Terminator is he's scrappy. Like, he's not gonna physically fight this Terminator. He has
Yeah.
to rely on his wits and his cunning and his skill. And Anton Yelchin represents all of that. And he brings all of that to this character. The way he fights Terminators throughout his scenes in this film, or the way he fights Terminators throughout his scenes in this film, are someone who's doing it using his pure skills versus, pure force. And it is a great performance. I think it really captures the spirit of that character. So I think when you're trying to create connective thread, obviously there's very few returning actors in this film. There's just one, and it's technically a voiceover, or a digital likeness, however you want to call it. That makes it two, I guess. But he really captures the spirit of the original version of Kyle Reese. I think he brings a lot of that to the table, and you can easily see this person becoming that version of the character. And I think that is something that very often kind of gets lost in these kind of reimaginings, reboots, prequels, is you cast people to play previous versions of characters that you've already seen and then they kind of don't really line up. So with Anton Yelchin doing a fantastic job, not just embodying that character, but bringing himself to it and not feeling restricted by what came before.
And just while we're talking about Kyle Reese, I do want to shout out Jada Grace Berry, who plays a character named Star, who's a young girl that is looked after by Kyle, and really feeds into what I'm saying about being the heart of the movie, because their relationship, the fact that he's taking care of her, the fact that she is clearly born after Judgment Day, but is still a optimistic, bright, hopeful character, says a lot about Kyle Reese's guardian priorities and what he's trying to instill in her. So that character even still is feeding into the characterization of Kyle Reese. And I absolutely love the part. She doesn't speak in this movie. Her character doesn't. But at one point, Marcus has a cut on his arm, and she pulls a Band-Aid out of her fanny pack and puts it on him. Super sweet moment. Very good.
Yeah. Just wonderful. Yeah, no notes.
And then, of course, Christian Bale is in this movie. This is post-Dark Knight Christian Bale. This is, top of the world Christian Bale, and he's cast as John Connor. We have spent 3 movies learning about this leader of the resistance, this great general of the army, John Connor. We've seen him briefly in some flashbacks. I think only T1 physically shows his face, if I'm trying to recall. But it's all been built up without us ever actually seeing this character, and now we get to actually see it. And 2009, you can't pick anybody better than John Connor to be the star of your action movie. I think he does a great job. I mean, #PP, the only quote unquote downside I'll say is that he plays it perfectly, but this role just isn't maybe as interesting as what Sam Worthington got, or even Kyle Reese. I mean, it's kind of just finishing up John Connor's arc from T3, becoming the leader of the resistance. And again, it's Christian Bale. He's doing a great job, but that's about all I can say about it.
Yeah, it's not meant backhanded. There is a bit of an arc of him becoming the leader here, but it's not really growth for him. It's really growth for others. Basically the actual resistance leadership doesn't really like John Connor. And shout out to Michael Ironside there. But really what ends up happening is at the end of the film, everybody that already supports John Connor stands up to the rest of the resistance and essentially backs Connor over the kind of instilled leadership. And but it's not a lot of change in Connor himself. So in that regard, this is pretty straightforward for Christian Bale. Like I said, that's not meant as backhanded. It's just what the script is going with. But I do think he does a great job. I think at this point, I don't know if there was a better person you could have cast as John Connor. As far as name recognition, goodwill with fans, everything. Christian Bale, like you said, this is right after Dark Knight. I think he was even having meetings with McGee while they were filming Dark Knight about this. So this was something that was percolating. Obviously, it had to be. But I do think he does a great job. He gets in on the action. He does sit out a good bit of the movie. He's kind of secondary for a lot of it. And that actually kind of comes from the fact that in the original version of the script, John Connor was not a lead character. He was a secondary character. They were kind of going to approach it from that perspective of kind of at the end of this movie, John Connor essentially assumes leadership of the Resistance. They were probably going to use the same kind of ending, but have him be kind of secondary throughout. But as this movie goes on, he gets more and more presence, and then he's a central, figure of the finale of this movie. So it's definitely hard on the action. He's right in the thick of it, and like you said, doing good stuff. But like you said, just by the nature of the story, there's not quite as many layers to it as there are with some others.
And Bryce Dallas Howard plays Kate Connor, a returning character known as Kate Brewster in T3, played by Claire Danes. Obviously now they are married, as they were told they would be. And she was a veterinarian in T3, now is clearly just a full-on medical doctor. Helps several people with their trauma and wounds and injuries throughout this movie. And that's about it as far as the character. Not a lot of screen time, not a lot of affecting the main plot. You see her kind of supporting John throughout the movie, and again, their medical expertise has a few key scenes, whether it's discovering that Marcus is a Terminator or a major surgery that is implied at the end of this movie. But overall, a reduced role for the character, and obviously a recast, just like with John Connor. Although, interestingly, bit of a Hollywood gonna Hollywood situation. We jump forward in time, so you go from Nick Stahl to Christian Bale to age up John Connor. But you go from Claire Danes to Bryce Dallas Howard, she's actually younger. I don't know, hashtag PP, that's just not good. But
well, and like Connor and like Bale is older than Nick Stahl, but like it's like 6 years. Like it's not like a tremendous amount of difference to where you're like, oh, we can't use those actors. We need our grizzled older actors. You're not casting like Josh Brolin or something.
I mean, Christian Bale is really good at that hoarse voice, that grizzled voice. He's like yelling this entire movie.
He is.
This is Connor.
It was kind of a gag at the time, I think, how he talks in this movie, how he just doesn't like speak. Everything is yelling.
It's probably just the effect of playing Batman for that second movie. It's just his voice was shot for a good year.
It's just so everything sounds like he has throat cancer. But it's no, so yeah, it is a bit odd. And yeah, it's kind of a bummer that, in T3, Kate kind of gets to be a big part of the plot, gets in on the action, gets to do some stuff, where here Kate's almost not even here. And I that's not at Bryce Dallas Howard. That's not at with anything of how she's playing the character. There's just not a lot for that character to do in this film. That to me, that's just a genuine criticism. There's things you could have done differently, sure, but ultimately her character just does not have much to do here. And it's unfortunate. I think Bryce Dallas Howard, obviously, as we've seen, can be a tremendous actress. They probably could have done a lot more with the character, but that's just not the direction they chose to go in for this film.
And there's a few new characters to round out the Resistance, like Blair Williams, who is played by Moon Bloodgood. Andrew, I'm going to say that name again. Moon Bloodgood. What a freaking name. Sounds rad as hell. It's got 3 instances of double O's in it. I mean, it's just cool. Reading it reminds me of like a character from a fighting game. Maybe appropriate, because the year before this, she was in Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li. Look, we might be talking about her again on a future episode. But I stop obsessing over her cool name. The character of Blair Williams, I think, is awesome. She doesn't show up until maybe like halfway through the movie. And her and Marcus go on a bit of an excursion as they make their way back to the Resistance base, and they bond over that, and he saves her life, and she sees him as human. So after the reveal that he is part robot, she still continues to see him as human and helps him escape. So a very pivotal role, and it just played really well. Her character reminds me a lot more of Kate from T3. She is in on the action, she can handle her own, and is willing to see the good in people. So doing a lot with a little as far as screen time, I would describe this as. And yeah, all the credit to Moon there to bring this character to life.
Absolutely. I agree completely. Like, she doesn't show up until about halfway through. when kind of Marcus's story starts to lead into the Resistance more directly. But yeah, she's awesome. She gets in on the action. She can fight. Stands on her own. It's really cool.
Cool look with the red stripe across the eyes.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, like you said, she's a new character in this established world that can be kind of difficult to stand out, especially when there's already kind of a prominent new character being given a lot more prominence. But she, like you said, makes the most of every single scene that she's in. Ends up working alongside Marcus for several key scenes there as well. And it all works really well. Very cool.
And then we have Common playing Barnes, another member of the Resistance. His brother is killed in the beginning of this movie, and he somewhat holds that against Marcus and, of course, all of the Terminators. As a few key scenes, and Common, in my opinion, always stands out in a good way. He always pops up in these small roles and is just cool as hell. And I know he is a rapper, he's a hip-hop artist. I know that. I'm not sure I've ever listened to his music, but I know him as an actor that always makes movies cooler. That is, to me, he's an actor first and foremost, because I've seen him in a million things. From Smokin' Aces to Wanted, he has a really cool part in John Wick Chapter 2. Common, always killing it.
He has an Academy Award, a Primetime Emmy, and a Golden Globe. He just needs a Tony, man.
Wow, what's his Academy Award for?
I don't know.
I assume you're like one click away from finding out, Andrew.
Yes, let's find out. That was 2 clicks. Best Original Song, Glory, with John Legend for Selma.
Oh, okay.
Still counts.
Yeah.
But
Eminem's an Academy Award winner. But it ain't for his performance at 8 Mile.
Somebody put Common in a musical so we can get the EGOT there. Yeah, like I said, I've never listened to his music either. No other, no great reasons for not doing so, just haven't. I'll have seen him as act, and I'm never sad to see him on my screen. Like you said, his part in John Wick 2 is really, really good. Here, he's really just kind of John's right-hand man, kind of his muscle, kind of a tough guy. Not a whole lot extra going on there. Like I said, this movie's pretty stuffed with the stuff that its lead characters are doing. The side characters don't always get a whole lot, and this is kind of one of those. But works well with the cast and does a good job.
Now, Andrew, you already mentioned Michael Ironside a little bit earlier. He is playing General Ashdown. So he's in charge of the human resistance at the beginning of the movie.
I'm in charge here!
And until he is blown away by Skynet. And look, great job. Michael Ironside always doing a good job. But I am reminded of something I think I previously brought up in this podcast long ago, is that on another podcast, the Cracked podcast, there was an episode where they said that Jack Nicholson's star power was so great that he launched 2 other careers by men just doing impressions of Jack Nicholson. Now, the 2 men that they shouted out were Michael Keaton and Christian Slater. We agree.
One of which I agree with
is above that, but
yes.
I can see some of the comparisons. Not gonna lie. However, I think Michael Ironside kind of fits into that. He physically just kind of resembles Jack Nicholson, and especially whenever he's in these military roles, he is barking orders. It's Jack Nicholson's character from A Few Good Men, like almost 100% transplanted. Like if that's what you want in your movie, Michael Ironside's going to deliver it every time.
I don't disagree that there are some commonalities there, but Michael Ironside has done other things.
I mean, I would never reduce an actor's entire career to impersonating another actor, but
like he's
I just think
Scanners in 1981. So I think in 1981, there's no A Few Good Men even in existence yet. So he's got plenty of movies that are coming about.
So you're saying Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men is the poor man's Michael Ironside?
Exactly, because Michael Ironside is in Top Gun, just to remind everybody. But which is 6 years before A Few Good Men. So Jack Nicholson,
right.
We're on to you. But Scanners, or even stuff like Total Recall. Total Recall was 1990. Like Richter, See You at the Party, Richter. That's all Michael Ironside. He's great. But when you look at like Starship Troopers and Terminator Salvation, you are looking at him just like playing the same guy every time, aren't you? If you need your grizzled general leader character, you just get Michael Ironside, apparently. Which I'm never going to be sad at that. He's really good at it. He's Michael Ironside. He's just great from everything. Like I already mentioned, Scanners and Total Recall, stuff like Starship Troopers, or even he was Darkseid's voice in the DC animated universe for a long time, and brought the perfect amount of Chris, what's that word?
Gravitas. I tried something different on that one. How was that?
Yeah.
Is that gravitas?
Talking about Darkseid, I don't know if that was the best choice, but just a great character actor. He's everywhere. He's fantastic, and I'm never sad to see him on my screen.
Well, Andrew, that covers our main cast. Let's talk about the scenes of this film, specifically our personal favorites. So in your opinion, Andrew, when is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is the best scene of Terminator Salvation?
I thought about this a lot. There's a lot of really fun scenes in this movie. A lot of fun, maybe not the right word, but a lot of really good action sequences in this movie. But the one that stands out to me is kind of the chase that happens kind of after the gas station standoff with Marcus, Kyle, Star against ultimately several Terminators. But also kind of a weird standoff with these kind of adjacent resistance fighters. They're resistance, but they kind of seem hesitant to help others. They're kind of very much we're our group. We watch after our own. But ultimately, this leads the Terminators finding them. They take several of them, including ultimately taking Kyle and Star. But we get this extended chase where the Terminators kind of en route by air and by ground. They've got these motorcycle drones they use, which are pretty rad, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But it's just cool, practical, a lot of practical explosions here, a lot of practical vehicle stunts, and it's just very cool. You get to see Marcus kind of really showing off that just maybe there's a little bit more to this guy than we realized. To this point, he's kind of not really had any kind of intense feats of strength, but there's several things here where you're just kind of like, you're not human, are you? But I love practical stunts. Obviously, they're fighting, Terminator aircrafts and Terminators on bikes. There's definitely some CG involved, but a lot of practical explosions here, a lot of cool set pieces. Driving this weird Mad Max looking truck the whole time where they get to throw Terminator motorcycles into Terminator planes, and I'm just cool. Like, it's the kind of stuff I want to see in this movie. It's the kind of stuff I want to see from if we're going to be in a post-Judgment Day world. I want to see these people fighting off multiple Terminators, and they do it, and it's cool, and it's awesome. So I'm going with this kind of chase sequence here. Like I said, it does have a bad ending. Obviously, Kyle and Star both get kidnapped and put on this transport. Marcus ends up on his own. That's how he ends up working together with Blair. But this extended chase, even including the gas station sequence before it, just cool stuff. And I like it. We get to see a little bit more of Reese's scrappiness. We get to see Marcus kind of starting to have a chance to stand up against these Terminators, and it's just cool. And then ultimately, like I said, there is that weird Mad Max analog of like, there is this group that's kind of, we look after our own, are hesitant to help any others, and are kind of ready to take these people out if they have to. And
definitely a staple trope of the post-apocalyptic story.
Well, yeah, and it shows that just because it is the post-apocalyptic world, and just because there is a quote-unquote resistance, it does not mean that everybody is part of that resistance, which I think is sometimes a thing that gets lost when everybody in the post-apocalyptic world is conveniently on the same side. Which, as things like The Walking Dead show us, no.
Humans don't work that way.
No.
Definitely not.
Guys, have you met humans?
Too many. I'm agreeing with you 100%. I have this exact scene written down as my personal favorite. All in all, my favorite parts of this movie are exactly this. These scenes in the wasteland that is California. It's all stuff that we've never seen before, and it's brought to life so beautifully, so well. But this action sequence in particular, yeah, I'm highlighting this as my favorite. And I love that standoff at the gas station whenever they meet these survivors, because earlier in the movie, whenever Marcus and Kyle Reese first meet, Kyle holds a gun up to Marcus, and Marcus is able to disarm him very quickly and turn the gun on him. And he tells him, "You point that gun at somebody, you better be ready to pull the trigger." And then in this scene, when they meet these survivors, Marcus and Kyle and Star are completely unarmed. They are totally outgunned and outpowered by the humans that are surrounding them. And Kyle thinks it's appropriate to repeat the line. He tells him, "You point that gun at someone, you better be ready to pull the trigger." And the look that Marcus gives him, he looks over at him like, this is not the time to be trying to be tough guy. Like, we are totally outnumbered here. Excellent.
Kyle, this is not the time for puns.
Yes. It's such a good callback. It's such a good little character moment for Marcus and Kyle. I really like that. But then these Terminators show up. And up until this point in the franchise, when you think Terminator, you think this silver humanoid robot. We see so many different versions of that, whether it be drones or carrier transports, or this machine that reaches through the ceiling and wholesale grabs people, just plucks them out of this room and starts taking them. And the sound design is so cool. The mechanical sound these giant robots make. I mean, I can't even do an impression of it because it's so, mechanical. But I love that sound design. It's so like menacing and foreign sounding and weird. Really good stuff. There's no music through most of the section. You just kind of hear the chaos and the explosions and, again, that mechanical sound. This movie employs a lot of good uses of the oneer, a big, long, continuous shot with no cuts. A really good one comes here as they're fleeing the gas station. We're following Kyle and Marcus as all the other people are running off into the horizon and getting picked off by the Terminators, just really conveying that chaos. And they decide they need to stick by and not run away and try to take down the Terminator. That's the way they're going to survive. And this, there's a bit of like realism thrown in here. What I mean is, Marcus's big plan is to drive a gas tanker into the giant robot and leave a trail of gas and then tell Kyle to shoot the tanker to explode it. And Kyle shoots at it and it doesn't blow up. Because that's actually not how gas works. You can't shoot at it and cause an explosion. Like, maybe if you get lucky with a spark, but that's totally a thing that's only in movies. And then it's Star, actually, who knows that you have to use a flare. She holds the flare out for Marcus to throw into the trail they leave behind. And it was just a fun little, like, for this brief moment, we're going to talk about realism and be like, this is
a Terminator movie. Yes.
Yeah. But I really like that moment for all of them. And one of our many, many Easter eggs, Kyle Reese reloads that shotgun one-handed by flipping it. And I don't know if that's actually possible, but Arnold famously does that in T2. I would be curious. I don't really know much about guns, but I'd be curious if that's like a real technique a human could pull off. But regardless, it looks rad in both cases, and Kyle's able to do it. And again, just a fun little Easter egg there. But man, those motorcycle Terminators. So this giant Terminator, his shins come off and become like self-driving motorcycles. And I really love this shot of, from the motorcycle's point of view, it is analyzing the debris that's coming their way. And it creates a path where like it drifts and slides and ducks some and gets back up on two wheels. Like, it analyzed the best course through the road. Super freaking awesome. And then, as you mentioned, they drop they're in this like tow truck and they drop the hook. They catch the motorcycle and then inadvertently they hit their brakes whenever a giant carrier stops in front of them in the air, and they swing that motorcycle into the aircraft. Great stuff. So well designed, so fun. I love the look of all of these machines. I love how it's all different. It's all stuff we've never seen before. And you're 4 movies deep into a franchise, you should still be able to deliver that kind of stuff. And this movie does in spades. So great pick, Andrew, because I'm agreeing with you 100%.
It's a great scene. I'm glad we agree. Like I said, it's. I always do like scenes where they kind of point out the impracticality of just shooting at things and expecting them to explode.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite scenes in Last Action Hero, where he comes to the real world and he shoots the back of a cab several times and he's shocked that it doesn't blow up the car. But yeah, it's just a great sequence. It really does. Like you said, we're getting almost all new stuff here. You do run into an issue. I will say this hashtag PP of instances where there are things that seem more advanced than the Terminators from the first film, which everything here is supposed to be less advanced than. Because the minute the motorcycles popped out, I was like, that's cool. Why not just send those back? Like, why
Andrew, come on, you're forgetting one of the major rules of time travel is that you can only send living tissue back. That's why the T-800 is able to go back, because he's covered in living tissue.
That's convenient. Yes.
Because the idea of a
correct you
motorcycle
are, Chris.
covered in living tissue going back in time is absolutely terrifying. Gross.
Some body horror. That's some Cronenberg stuff there. It's covered in tissue just to get it back to our time. No, you are correct. But otherwise, this is just cool. You're seeing new Terminator technology, which is the other thing. Like you said, with a lot of these movies, the Terminators are kind of variations on a theme. You do get some like gunships and stuff in Terminator. I think in T2, you get a few glimpses of some of these tanks and airships. But by and large, the Terminators themselves are humanoid robots. And then obviously we jump up to the T-1000 and Terminator 2, and then the TX and T3. But they're still humanoid robots, by and large. And so here, we get a chance to kind of introduce some new weird stuff. Still riffing on a theme, but I like seeing creativity. I like seeing them change things around, introduce other ideas, because, it's an all-powerful AI. Not just going to make the same stuff over and over again. And that is an interesting subplot of this movie, is the dawn of the T-800. Basically, the movie is essentially the first time Skynet unleashes a T-800 on somebody. So the model that is ultimately sent back in the first Terminator is essentially debuted here, for lack of a better word. And that's pretty cool. It kind of shows the passage of time. We do see some of the previous models as well. Like we see a T-600, which Kyle Reese does describe briefly in Terminator as being a lot easier to spot. I think that's all he says about them. But so he kind of made some aesthetic choices, kind of making them bigger, bulkier.
And they look really, I want to talk about that design though, because they look really cool. Like they look a lot like a T-800 skeleton, but they're black. It makes them look so intimidating, and they sometimes have like this like rags hanging off of them. But I think the design is like so cool. Like it's a small variation on the design we've seen already, but it's enough to make it distinct. And I'm not sure a Terminator has ever looked more intimidating than the black skeleton. There's like the half skeleton crawling after John Connor, or the one that Kyle Reese strings up. It just looks absolutely terrifying. And I don't know, I'm kind of wondering now, like, is it designed to be a black Terminator, or is it that the Terminators aren't yet covered in living tissue, so their skeletons get exposed to explosions and debris and stuff, and they just look wet?
See, I was leaning more towards that. Like, it's not necessarily that it's black; it's that it's just out in the field. It's weathered.
Okay.
It's gone.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's seen some stuff at this point.
Yeah,
obviously,
sure.
like Dark Fate, I think, is where we actually get like a Terminator that's a black endoskeleton for the first time. Like,
were you just trying not to say black Terminator?
I was trying to say a black Terminator. Yes. It's like I saw, and it was an interview I saw. It was with James Cameron and Arnold talking about how when they were casting Terminator, O.J. Simpson was in the running for the Terminator, and James Cameron was like, O.J. Simpson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and when he heard both names, he was like, I don't know about either of those guys. And then Arnold went, it became clear that they didn't want O.J. Simpson to be Terminator because nobody could believe him as a killing machine. And Arnold sits for a minute. The crew around him starts laughing, and then he just looks at them all and he goes, yeah. And I'm like, that's the doofiest Arnold response I've ever seen ever. But he knew what he was doing. But yes, I was trying to avoid just saying outright a black Terminator, Chris. Thanks. But yeah, I do like the look though. They look scary, and they're definitely like thicker.
Yeah,
like they're definitely
them boys
like,
thick. Yeah,
them boys thick. And don't get me wrong, Arnold's plenty thick, but don't misunderstand me. But the endoskeletons obviously are just designed as being much stockier, and it makes sense. Like as you advance technology, you can make things smaller and more efficient and more compact. So I'm curious about what the time jump between the T-800s and the T-1000 is, though. Like, how fast does Skynet get from the T-800s to the T-1000? Because that's a huge leap, if you're asking me. That's some massive advances in technology.
Right.
But either way, all of this looks really cool. I love the different looks, the different designs. And the T-600, like I said, making them brick crap houses was definitely the right choice.
And speaking of those designs, Andrew, you talked about how like they run the risk of having Terminators more advanced, and we talked about the time travel thing. But one thing that's interesting, you've seen a lot of franchises that last decades. When the franchise is set in the future, you're always creating future technology, but you're limited by your current technology. Alien's a great example. The computers and stuff in Alien, you look at them now and it's like, well, they would obviously be way more advanced than what we're seeing there. But as that series goes on, you've got to use today's technology to make cool technology, but your cool technology can't look drastically different than the technology established by Alien. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
The Star Trek franchise is like that as well. Terminator franchise is like that. That first movie establishes like this red vision that Terminators have, and it's just like a simple red filter, and it's constantly analyzing. And we've come up with much cooler UI since then. This movie, I think, does a pretty good job of, when you're in a Terminator's point of view, it looks totally different. It's more primitive. Like, it's black and white. Some of them just see like in dots. But from a technical standpoint, more work is going into creating the POV we see here than we saw in Terminator. But it's still believable, but that this is more primitive than the previous Terminator vision. Did I explain that well? Do you understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I explain what you're saying, because it's a problem when you're working in a movie set in the future, but like you said, you're bound by what you've done before. And they actually said that was an aesthetic choice when they were showing the heads-up displays of Terminators. They purposely made them even simpler than they were when you saw them in the earlier films. So it's that thing where, like you said, you're kind of bound by it because, while yes, technology has advanced in a certain way, you don't want the movie to look stylistically out of place with what came before. Like, smartphones now is something where it's like, cool, like, no movie set in the future has ever shown anything even remotely close to a smartphone. They're still using like phone handles with headsets in some
right.
future
You gotta have a
movies.
wire
Like,
to that phone.
yeah, gotta have a wire to that phone, or it's like still a thing in your house, and it's like, no, I take my phone with me everywhere now, man. It's terrifying. All the radio waves in my brain. But I think this movie does a good job of trying to thread that needle, of trying to not look too dated, but still try to make things stylistically fit. There's probably things that don't line up exactly, but ultimately I think the movie does take a lot of active choices to try to keep the aesthetics similar.
Whenever we first see Marcus in the future, he naked, Andrew. He crawls out the hole in the mud, completely naked. We get a little full frontal male nudity, and as we all know from my Predator 2 episode, I'm a big proponent that there should be more male nudity in film. So this movie delivers. A little extra kudos for that.
I agree. I think
I just wanted to sit in that silence after.
Man. Watchmen and Terminator Salvation in the same year, guys.
Andrew, how do you feel about the Easter eggs in this movie? I talked about reloading the shotgun. There's a lot of them, a minute of them. During the final fight in this movie, there's a moment where John Connor is limping up metal stairs as the T-800 chases him, just like in T1. The most obvious one probably being the lines. Kyle Reese gets to say his line, "Come with me if you want to live." John Connor takes on the classic Terminator line of "I'll be back." What do you think? Do they work in this movie? Are they fitting in? Are they enhancing?
The dialogue ones stand out, but I don't think they detract from everything. We were just talking about movies with Easter eggs before we started recording, honestly, and there's nothing to some of, like, I've watched movies where like the movie can't get out of its own way with Easter eggs. Like, the Easter eggs are just all the time, and I think this movie strikes a good balance. Like, the dialogue is probably the most, like, standout, and it's really just the 2-3 lines. There's not a whole lot of them. There's the one about fate. I think John Connor says at the end too. The only fate we make is our own, or
Yeah. Well, that's
some
something John
variation
Connor has
thereof.
always said and got from his mom.
Yeah. So I mean, we do things like that, but by and large, it's all quick lines of dialogue. We're not halting the movie to make some kind of reference. And I think that's really where Easter eggs tend to go wrong. Is just where you, like I said, you can't get out of your own way to stop reminding us that this franchise has other movies. And it's like, I know it does. That's why I'm here. But I think this movie handles it pretty well, by and large. I don't think there's definitely more egregious movies I can think of, but even then, I don't think this movie even ranks on that scale. I think it uses them relatively sparingly, and by and large, most of them breeze along with the plot without much issue.
Andrew, we should talk about the finale of this movie, the big showdown
Yeah, we should.
at Skynet. Which, look, hashtag PPA, I gotta get this out of the way. I love that in Terminator 3, the big reveal is that Skynet's in millions of computers around the world. There's no core to Skynet. And the entire plot of this one is we have to destroy the core of Skynet.
Well, to be fair, they destroy it and then they admit full on that Skynet's grip on the world is still strong. But it definitely wasn't lost on me either that they were like, there's no core except for this core. And this core won't destroy all of Skynet. It's a little bit of clunky dialogue there, but and it's interesting because it stylistically changes a lot of the movie. Because to this point, we're kind of gritty and like grimy for most of this movie because we're like out in the field, we're in these like dingy resistance lockdown shelters, we're in all these specific things, and then all of a sudden we're in this white clean facility, and John Connor like drops in, and I was like, oh, it's so bright, like it's such a different look to it. And then ultimately we end up in this kind of foundry type area, which allows us to kind of echo the endings of T1 and T2, where we're kind of getting like the molten metal stuff going on. So we get they definitely are paying homage with some of these locations and some of these settings. But this is ultimately where we have our big showdown with essentially the first T-800. Where it is essentially John Connor and Marcus versus this thing. And he's nasty. Yeah.
A missed opportunity for male nudity here, though. Whenever naked Arnold steps out, there's too much shadow. They cover it up.
And it ain't even really Arnold this time. Like it's not like you have to show his stuff. You could just show this guy's stuff.
Or they could have shown his stuff. I mean, his Mr. Olympia poses. He's posed nude before. You can throw his actual dong in there. Spam some money. But anyway, they choose not to do that. And I do like the reveal of the T-800 because there's some clever editing where you think John Connor is about to discover Kyle Reese. He's looking for Kyle. Kyle's held in a chamber. John is looking through these chambers. We think they're in the same room. Then it's revealed, no, he's actually in the room where the T-800 is rolling off that assembly line that we learned about in the previous movie. And for me, the Arnold likeness totally works. I think it looks pretty good, especially considering by now there's pretty dated technology. Yeah. And it's not, they don't try to make him speak or imitate his voice. You've established in this timeline that all T-800s look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You got to do it. And it lasts long enough to be cool. And then his skin gets melted off. We don't got to worry about it anymore. It works. I really like the Arnold likeness. I think it totally plays well. Hashtag PP. I will say this. This finale is probably my least favorite part of the movie, but mainly because I think the other stuff was so good. I think that wasteland that we've never seen before was just so good that to, in the finale, end up in a human versus robot scenario like we've seen felt too samey than what we've seen before versus all the new stuff this movie was establishing. That being said, look, this is a hashtag positivity podcast. I haven't forgotten. I think it's ultimately still a really cool fight. The molten lava you think is going to destroy the T-800 because that's how he dies in T2, but he's able to keep moving forward, but they're able to cool the molten lava so he gets covered like in rock. I thought that was a fun little twist. And just jump forward a little bit to the T-800 finally meeting its demise. Marcus stabs this metal beam through his neck and twists until his head pops up and flies through the air.
So freaking cool.
One of the coolest ways I've ever seen a Terminator get killed. I love that finish.
Just straight up awesome. I do love. So it's interesting because Marcus ends up in Skynet and he's able to interface with all the machines, and this is where he kind of ends up finding out that he is a machine and that Skynet has been watching him this whole time. We didn't mention her in the cast, but I'll mention her now. We've basically 2 scenes with Helena Bonham Carter. She shows up at the beginning of the film as what is her character's name? She shows up as Dr. Serena Kogan, who basically is the one that is with Marcus trying to get him to sign his body over to Cyberdyne Systems. He is resistant. Just a bit of a weird scene overall. But ultimately she gets him to say yes. Definitely throws in a wrench there that she has cancer and that what she's doing may also be more designed as a way to extend her own life. So she seems to be in 2003, the prequel of this film, to the prequel of the franchise. It's odd that this movie's technically a prequel that takes place in the future.
I was going to ask you, Andrew, where does this land in the timeline? Is this
it's a prequel?
So this is the first movie in the timeline? Technically,
yes. Because the events of this movie have to happen for what happens in Terminator 1 to happen.
If you're following the life of John Connor, it starts
you start with Terminator 1.
Or Terminator 2. I mean, he's conceived in Terminator 1. Do you consider that?
Is that not part of the process, Chris?
She's pregnant at the end of T1. Is John Connor alive? Answer that loaded question, Andrew.
Oh, man, why'd you have to go and do that? No, I think this is technically a prequel because it takes place in the future before the events that lead to the people going to the past of Terminator 1. So this is where you find out who all those people are. And then again, I guess you could always view these movies as a circle. Like it all just comes back upon itself.
Kind of start anywhere.
So it really doesn't matter. The other place that Helena Bonham Carter appears is towards the end of this finale, where she shows up as essentially Marcus's human interface for talking to Skynet. They basically are like, we figured you'd like looking at her because you have some attachment to her, and switches to a few other people, but this is basically her other big scene, just the 2, where she basically tells Marcus, she's like, you did a fantastic job doing all those things you didn't know you were doing. And Marcus rips open the skin on the back of his head, rips the chip out, crushes it up. Seems weird that you wouldn't have any other fail-safes in place for something like this. But hey, that's all it takes for Marcus to start stomping on this Terminator's face. I'm all for it. It's a cool moment because it's Marcus kind of being told, in a way, you don't have any control over this. You are always part of us. You have been part of us. And that's just what it is. They're like, you've done everything we've needed you to do perfectly, and now you're going to get John Connor killed. And Marcus is basically like, yeah, that's real interesting, and then runs away. And goes to fight him. But I like it. I think it's a cool scene where Marcus kind of chooses his own fate in a movie series that's all about your fate is your own. And ultimately becomes a big piece of the future because during that final fight between John Marcus and the Terminator, John Connor is stabbed through the chest with a piece of rebar. The same piece of rebar that Marcus then rips out of John Connor's body to rip the Terminator's head off with. It's pretty metal, guys. Like, it's pretty cool.
Pretty gnarly stuff, yeah.
But ultimately, one of the key pieces of Marcus's kind of synthetic humanoid Terminator thing that he is that he still has his human heart. And that heart is used to keep John Connor alive through a transplant. So Marcus is able to quite literally give his life again to save John Connor. And it is a very cool moment that, solidifies what he is and what he wanted to do and allows him some redemption over what he did the first time he died.
Yeah, also notably that final scene where Marcus makes that sacrifice to give up his heart. We briefly had a moment where John and Kyle come face to face as he's helping Kyle escape, but here really we get like the first time John Connor and Kyle Reese get to interact, come face to face, and John is the one that officially inducts Kyle into the Resistance by giving him the red armband. And I love the little note early where it's a red armband to represent blood, because that's what separates the two. Other than the case of Marcus, I guess. But I thought that was pretty cool. Nice little moment at the end there. And man, ultimately, like I said, I really like this movie. I think the shadow of T2 still looms large. Like, you're just constantly, every movie in this franchise, got to compare it to T2. It's hard to say any of them are better, but this movie just so smartly, in my opinion, gets away from those comparisons by setting it post Judgment Day, totally different plot. Like, it separates it enough, but it's still the same characters, the same universe. A really smart way to do a sequel, and I've always been a defender of it. Still am. Very much enjoy it. And even this rewatch, like, in my head, it was more of a clean break from the previous movies. But rewatching it now, like, aside from the fun Easter eggs, it's still acknowledging a lot of stuff from those first three movies. Even like the T-800 having a nuclear core, that's established in T3, I think, is the first time we see that. And that's how he levels the facility here at the end. And
I think the cells even look exactly the same. I'm pretty sure the cells look exactly the same.
And of course, the character of Kate still being around. Like, it is acknowledging those first three movies.
And like I said, I did mention there's the one point of confusion that I did point out, I think I mentioned this to you before the podcast, is that in 2003, when Marcus is being kind of put to death, they mentioned that the doctor works for Cyberdyne. Now, in T3, they basically say the United States Air Force acquired all of Cyberdyne's assets. But they do make a point when Marcus is like watching through the internet before his mind breaks and he shuts down, which, hey, I get it. It's they do bring up a headline that says U.S. Air Force acquires Cyberdyne systems. So keeping that thread alive a little bit there to kind of still keep T3 canon for the most part, at least to this. Obviously, we'll talk about this more in the coming weeks. This ends up kind of being the end of this hypothetical timeline because it acknowledges T3 and moves on to what would have been the future. But both sequels that follow this are essentially standalone sequels to earlier films. Genesis sort of being a retelling of the first film, and then obviously Dark Fate being a follow-up to 2. We'll talk about that more in those ensuing weeks, but that leaves this film as kind of the end of this hypothetical first Terminator timeline, which is unfortunate. I think there definitely was more you could have done here.
Yeah, it is a bummer. I would have liked to have seen that planned trilogy they had. And to my knowledge, reading about it, like, I haven't even seen like a synopsis or a loose plan for where the movies were going to go. But I like the status quo at the end here. I like the setting. It's a shame we didn't get more, but I'm glad we got what we did.
Yep. It's unfortunate, but you could be glad that we at least got a Terminator movie set in the post-apocalyptic world. And I'm kind of shocked it took that long, honestly. It seems like a relatively logical place to go, especially after T2. Well, I guess not really, because 10 to T2 is kind of closing off the book. And then, but the minute you opened it back up again, I think moving to the future was about as logical as it gets. So I'm glad I said Terminator seems like a franchise that struggles immensely these days. And so should we never get back to there, I'm glad we did get this movie and kind of got to see this world explored a little bit more.
All right, Andrew, 2 Terminator movies to go. It starts getting weird from here on out, but we will jump into that the rest of this month. For now, it's time for the question of the week. If you want to ask us a question for a future episode, you can do just that by hopping into our Discord. There's a link for you right there in the show notes. Just click it, download the app if you want, and join our little community here. This week, our question comes from Garofels, who says, when was the last time you were able to stay the least informed as possible about a movie? watch it, and then be pleasantly surprised by numerous elements. I'm talking not knowing any plot points or casting, and even more if possible. And he continues, the last movie I remember going in completely in the dark was the horror movie Cabin in the Woods. I only knew the writer-director for the movie and a friend recommendation. Man, I love this question because as we've established, even this very episode, I don't like trailers that spoil movies. And I guess that's not, I mean, no one really likes that. But
Yeah.
I make it a point to try to go out of my way to avoid trailers. And most recently, and we talked about on this podcast, for Spider-Man No Way Home, I didn't watch a single trailer. I mean, I knew I was going to see the movie. I knew that, there was rumors. I knew something big was going to happen. And literally, if I'm in a movie theater and that trailer came on, I ran out of the theater. I didn't hear a single trailer for that movie. So I knew next to nothing going in. I didn't know anything about the plot. Did not know the villains were going to be in it. It had so many fun surprises for me. And it was so exhausting to avoid those trailers that I haven't gone that extreme since then. I did it for Spider-Man and Eternals. I avoid all those trailers. But these days, if I'm in a theater, I see a trailer, I'm watching it.
Hashtag PP, Chris, but what a waste for Eternals.
I mean, sure, there wasn't a ton of big revelations there, but
yeah.
It paid off in spades with Spider-Man. I definitely was able appreciate that I did that. But at the time of this recording, Andrew, you have seen The Flash already. I haven't. I'm going to see it later this week. I have
apparently not seen the final version of The Flash, so that's how they're going to get me.
Interesting.
Apparently there's 10 minutes of footage I didn't see, including a surprise ending. So I
have not avoided trailers for that. I haven't got on my way to seek them out. I'm sure there's trailers I haven't seen, but if it comes up on TV or if it comes on in the movie theater, I've watched those trailers. The movie looks like a lot of fun, but I know had I avoided those trailers, man, there would be so much more cool stuff in there. It's just so hard to do these days, but
I guess this is spoilers for the Flash trailers if you somehow avoided all the press about the movie. I don't think there's any way you could have avoided knowing this, but imagine going into that movie and not knowing Michael Keaton's Batman was in it.
I mean, that's been their selling point since the teaser trailer, right? That Michael Keaton was in it.
Michael Keaton's Batman's in it.
I agree, though. I would have loved to be surprised by that.
I can't imagine the look on my face, if I had gone into that movie and then him being, and it's walking up to the house and going, and I just would have been like, no way. You didn't. You absolute crazy people did not actually do it, right? And then I would have seen it and I would have lost my mind. That would have been the Andrew Garfield moment for me. To be surprised by Michael Keaton's Batman. I would have cried, dude. I would have absolutely cried. But I've seen a lot for The Flash. I'm trying to think of the last movie I genuinely went into, because for me, just by nature of going to the movies all the time, I see the trailers all the time. It kind of sucks, but if you regularly go to the movies, there's almost nothing that you don't see. I'm trying to think offhand. I can think of the opposite, actually. There's a movie where I read spoilers and it made me want to go watch it. Because I wanted to see how that worked. It's a movie. It's very strange. I don't know if we've talked about this before. It's called Serenity. It is not the Firefly follow-up.
Oh, that's the first one that came to mind. There's another movie called Serenity?
There's another movie called Serenity, and it came out 5-6 years ago. It was after I got to Chicago. But it's Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jason Clarke, a couple of other actors, but it's sold as this weird Brian De Palma-esque erotic thriller. Matthew McConaughey is Anne Hathaway's ex-wife, and she's got her new rich husband, but she doesn't really like the new rich husband. And they're in this small fishing town that's kind of a tourist trap, and the implication of the trailer seems to be Anne Hathaway's character wants Matthew McConaughey to kill her husband or something. So they're selling this dramatic erotic tension in this kind of pseudo thriller. And I saw that trailer and was like, all right, whatever. Okay. And then I read a spoiler about it. So if you don't want spoilers for this 6-year-old movie now, folks, turn away.
Well, you gonna tell us the spoiler that sold you on the movie?
Okay. Do you want me to, or do you not want me to? I cannot if you enjoy seeing this movie for yourself.
I will never stumble across this movie on my own, so I'm going to say do the spoiler, but give a very clear warning that you're about to do
yes. I am spoiling the twist of this film, folks. So if you are intrigued by what I've told you so far, turn off the episode. The movie is continuing and it is building up this tension. It actually is a very interesting device because it uses the clicking of the fishing reels as they're like going through the water and getting hooked by fish as this kind of time plays. Very similar in that Glass Onion scene where the window on the Da Vinci keeps closing. Like it uses that thing very repeatedly throughout the movie. It's essentially a motif that is kind of dialing up the tension. Chris, I want you to guess what the twist of this movie is.
I have no idea. I don't know.
I'm going to tell you what this twist is, and you're not going to believe me.
They're actually fish, Andrew?
No.
In a fishbowl?
No.
I don't know.
Matthew McConaughey's character is in a video game.
Huh.
I am not lying to you. I am absolutely 100% not lying to you. The twist
They're
of
not
this
all
film,
in a video game, just Matthew McConaughey.
Yes, they are.
Oh,
the entire world is a video game created by his son after his father died. And basically in the real world, his son is like living with his mom and his abusive stepfather. So he creates a video game where his dad is alive and kills his abusive stepfather. That is centered around fishing. Actual, like, not fishing like, I sent you an email and give me your credit card details. Fishing like, I'm in the boat and I'm fishing.
Well, here's the important follow-up question, Andrew.
Fucking strange.
Is it good?
No. It's terrible.
It sounded pretty bad. I was curious if they pulled it off.
I read an article that revealed that twist, and I was like, no way. I was like, this is like a joke, right? Like, this is satire. There's no way this is really the plot of this movie. And I go and I watch it. And to be fair, you get like 90% of the way through the film until you find that out. Genuinely, honestly, I was like, no freaking way. Absolutely the twist of that film.
Andrew, I was looking up some stuff while you were talking about it. It's written and directed by Stephen Knight, who was one of 3 creators of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Okay, I believe that.
What a weird thing. What a weird thing that is.
You know what the kids want? A movie about a fishing video game.
Well, that's bonkers. I am morbidly curious about it now, but we'll see if I ever put in time.
That's the opposite, though. To be fair, that was the movie where I knew exactly what happened and didn't believe it. I think the last movie, looking back to the original prompt that I can think of, is probably Mission Impossible 4.
Interesting.
Because I saw that movie, like, I had checked out of the Mission Impossible movies by that point. I was kind of like, it's whatever. And my friend kind of came to me, he was like, hey, me and my family are going to see Mission Impossible 4. Do you want to come? And I was like, sure, I guess. And I watched it and I was like, well, that was awesome. So I had no idea what that movie was about. I had no idea who was in it. I had no clue about anything involving Mission Impossible 4. Went into that movie and just blown away. Because Mission Impossible 4, if you guys don't know, is awesome.
As is just about every other movie in that franchise.
5 and 6. 1, 3.
Garofal's here in his question mentioned Cabin in the Woods, and I will say I went into that pretty blind. I knew it was a horror movie, but that's about it. But I obviously didn't know the twist of that movie, and the tone of that movie was a total surprise. It fits into that horror comedy tone that I had a hard time really narrowing down. I still feel like there's a more specific term for these, like, trope subverting horror movies that have been popular the past couple of decades. But regardless, yeah, that's a great pick. Another horror movie that I knew, Andrew, I knew nothing about when I saw it was Paranormal Activity. Once again, mutual friend Doug was like, hey, I've heard this movie is really scary. You want to go see the midnight premiere with me? That's all I knew. I didn't know it was found footage. I didn't know it. I hadn't seen a single frame of that movie. That was one of the best theater experiences of my life because it was a packed theater and everyone, man, if you've seen the movie, like every time it goes to like the shot of them sleeping, you could just hear how uncomfortable everyone got because they knew something was coming and shifting in their seat and nervous laughing. And the end of that film is the only time that I recall I've ever physically jumped out of my seat. And afterwards, I watched the trailer, and the scene that made me jump is in the trailer. So that totally would have been ruined for me. So that was a great experience because I knew nothing about it going in.
I guess Endgame kind of counts because all the trailers for Endgame were useless. Like none of them.
I mean,
none of them really said anything. Like the 5 years later in Endgame, like the theater I was in, like audibly, were all like, "What the hell?" Like,
I love that moment because it's so slow. The reveal of 5 years later, yeah, you could kind of feel everyone being like, "What?
No way!"
And
like,
I guess we can openly talk about spoilers for Endgame, but decapitating Thanos also, like seeing that happen, like we're like 10 minutes in the movie. What's going on? Yeah, that was great. And MCU is pretty good with the trailers as far as taking characters out, putting characters in. I remember the Endgame trailer has this shot of Black Widow like doing like target practice. It's not even in the movie. I don't know where that was supposed to fit in, but
like the Infinity War trailer had fake outs too with like the Hulk and Wakanda thing.
Right, yeah.
Which wasn't real. And I will say this, the No Way Home trailers from day one preserved the other Spider-Man secret. They did not reveal that. They revealed the villains.
Yes. I did not know about the villains.
That's the more impressive part because I felt like that was just in the news. Like it was just out there that those guys were coming.
I knew
at least those 3.
Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. That's the only one I knew confirmed. But like Sandman, Lizard, I had no idea.
Sandman and Lizard were rumored. Obviously, trailers revealed Electro, and the trailers revealed all of them, I guess. Like,
the shot of the 3 Spider-Man going in slow motion up against all the villains at the Statue of Liberty. Yeah. And afterwards, I saw the trailer, and all they edited was they took out the other 2 Spider-Men, but you saw all the villains.
That scene in the first version of that trailer was actually a giveaway, though, because they left it in too long, and Lizard's face reacts to being hit by nothing.
Oh, interesting.
That was a key that a lot of... Because that, even in the circles that were discussing the spoilers, whether the other Spider-Men were in it was debated until it came out. Like, there were people convinced it was true, and there were people that was like, no, why would they do that? Like, why would they attach themselves to the legacy of those things? Like, it was a big back and forth of, like, why would they go that far when we already have Spider-Verse, no less? Like, they were like, why would they do an inferior version of Spider-Verse? And everyone was, so it was a big topic of debate. But that sequence where it's in the trailer, it's just Holland swinging across, I think it's Sandman, Electro, and Lizard. Swinging across, people were like, oh, but, they were pointing out that the guys on the top of the bottom don't look like they're aiming for Tom Holland. They look like they're swinging towards nothing. But then in the original trailer, you actually see Lizard's face react to getting hit by something. And people were like, well, what is that? And then the trailer was almost immediately addended and cuts off before that. But that was a big tell for people that there might be more going on there. Now, I do like how that movie handled like Doc Ock, how like in that final fight, Doc Ock is not a villain, like things like that. I think that's all very cool. But they did preserve the Spider-Men up until release. So like when those opening night reactions for Spider-Man, when Garfield and Maguire showed up, like I went at like 3 p.m. and it was still like insane reactions to those guys showing up. It was absolutely insane.
And that's just proof, though, that if The Flash wanted to, they could have preserved Michael Keaton. Because they were able to do Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield with no one outside of leaks and stuff. I mean, they did a pretty good job keeping that under wraps. So if they wanted to, they could have kept Michael Keaton a secret. But they're there to make money. You got to get people in the theaters.
Especially now, Michael Keaton is the selling point for so many. Like,
right.
You almost can't not include him. Otherwise, Michael Shannon's your selling point, which don't get me wrong.
Greatest actor of all time.
Is everyone's selling point. But like, we're at a point now where like, Michael Keaton may as well be the star of this movie as far as the marketing is concerned. So we'll see on Thursday. I guess that's when it comes out.
Yeah, people listening to this probably know everything already. But
yeah. So anyway, good question though.
If you want to discuss The Flash, again, hop into that Discord. We have a channel dedicated to that movie, and you let us know all your first impressions once that is out. And until next time, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. I forgot to do this joke, Andrew. I was going to do hello and oh, good for you.
Yeah, that's a deep cut. That was the other thing going through my head the whole time I was watching this. I was just like, oh yeah, this was the movie where you like lost your mind over absolutely nothing.
I'm a big proponent that there should be more male nudity in film. So this movie delivers. A little extra kudos for that.
I agree. I think
I just wanted to sit in that silence.
Show me the dick. No,
that might be post credits. I don't know what to do with that. Or they could have shown his stuff. I mean, his Mr. Olympia poses. He's posed nude before. You can throw his actual dong in there and pay him some money. But anyway, they choose not to do that.
I'm not saying it again, Chris.